"You've never been kissed?" she asked the mafia boss, then stepped closer in the dark. The 10 o'clock rain was a cold, miserable sheet against the windows of Café Rustico, blurring the city lights into a watercolor smear. Lena Brooks watched a drop slide down the glass, tracing a path that looked exactly like the one running down her own internal balance sheet, straight into the red. She blew a strand of dark hair out of her eyes and hoisted the bus tub onto her hip. It was heavy, laden with the sticky remnants of other people's comfortable lives. "Another coffee, sweetheart, and make it hot this time." Lena turned, forcing her lips into a shape that passed for a smile. Table 4. A man in a cheap suit who had been nursing the same cup for 2 hours, clearly waiting out the rain. "Right away, sir," she said, her voice betraying none of the sarcasm she felt. Sweetheart. She made less than minimum wage before tips, and this guy was shaping up to be a 5%er. Maybe. She mentally subtracted his likely non-tip from the meager pile she was counting on. Rent was due Friday. Her landlord, Mr. Sokolov, didn't accept sarcasm as payment. She moved through the small, steamy cafe, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and damp wool. At 25, Lena felt like she had been working this shift, in this cafe, in this city, for 100 years. Her feet ached, her apron was stained, her toughness was a thin veneer, like the gold plating on her cheap watch, and it was wearing through. Still, she found a moment to slide a day-old biscotti onto the saucer of a woman huddled in the corner, a regular whose coat was thinner than Lena's own. "On the house," Lena murmured. "Looks like you need it more than we do." The woman gave her a grateful, watery smile. That, at least, was real. It was as she turned from that small act of kindness that she felt it, a prickle on the back of her neck, the unmistakable weight of someone watching. Her eyes scanned the room. The cheap suit, the huddled regular, a young couple ignoring their food in favor of each other's faces, and then, in the back booth, the one half lost in shadow. She saw him. He was out of place, terribly, dangerously out of place. Café Rustico catered to students, struggling artists, and the perpetually damp. This man was none of those. He was tall, even sitting down, and wore a suit that probably cost more than her last 6 months' rent. It was dark, perfectly tailored, and seemed to absorb the meager light in the room. He was silent, utterly still. He wasn't reading or looking at a phone or sipping a drink. He was just watching. Lena met his gaze for a fraction of a second. His eyes were dark, intense, and fixed right on her. She felt a jolt, not of attraction, but of something cold, alarm. She broke contact immediately. Turning to the espresso machine, her hands suddenly clumsy on the portafilter, she brushed it off. Just a rich guy slumming it. Or maybe he was waiting for someone. It didn't matter. He wasn't her problem. Her problem was Table 4's hot coffee and the eviction notice she knew was waiting for her at home, slipped under her apartment door. She delivered the coffee. "Anything else?" "Just you, sweetheart," the man leered, before she could spit out a reply she would regret. The cafe door exploded inward, slamming against the wall with a crash that rattled every dish on the shelves. Chaos erupted. It was immediate and absolute. 2 men, broad and brutal in wet leather jackets, stormed in. They were not here for coffee. One of them kicked a chair, sending it skittering across the floor. "Where is he, Sal?" the first one shouted, his voice a gravelly roar. People screamed. The young couple dove for the floor. The cheap suit at Table 4 yelped and spilled his fresh, hot coffee all over his lap. Lena's training told her to drop, to get behind the counter. But she was frozen for a vital second, watching the men scan the room with predator's eyes. They were looking for someone. Then she heard a smaller sound, a sound almost lost in the shouting and the crash of an overturned table. A tiny, hiccuping sob. She looked down. Cowering beneath the table next to hers, the one the men had just passed, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, with big, dark eyes wide with terror and a pink bow in her hair. She must have been with the man the intruders were now dragging from a booth near the front. Instinct, raw and primal, took over. Lena didn't think. She moved. She dropped to her knees and scrambled under the table, covering the small, trembling body with her own. "Shh, shh," she whispered, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. "It's okay. Close your eyes. We're just playing hide and seek. Close your eyes tight." The girl whimpered and buried her face in Lena's stained apron, tiny hands grabbing fistfuls of the fabric. Lena wrapped her arms around her, making herself as big a shield as possible. She could hear the grunts, the sickening sound of a fist connecting with flesh. More shouting. She squeezed her own eyes shut, and then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. A new quality of silence fell over the room. Not peace, but a thick, heavy quiet, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The grunting had ceased, the shouting was gone. Lena held her breath. She heard a single set of slow, measured footsteps on the tile floor. They stopped right next to their table. She risked a glance, peeking out from under the tablecloth. The two intruders were on the floor. One was unmoving, face down. The other was groaning, clutching an arm that was bent at an angle it should not be. Standing over them was the man from the back booth. He was no longer sitting. He was a pillar of dark, cold power. His expensive suit was unrumpled. His face was calm, impassive, as if he were observing a minor inconvenience. Beside him stood another man, even larger, who must have been his driver or bodyguard and had entered unnoticed in the chaos. The man from the booth, the man in the suit, spoke, and his voice was not loud, but it filled the entire cafe. It was low, smooth, and colder than the rain outside. "Get them out!" The bodyguard hauled the two intruders to their feet as if they were sacks of garbage and dragged them out the door, into the night. The suited man turned. He looked at the terrified cafe owner, who was clutching a spatula like a weapon. He reached into his jacket, and for a heart-stopping second, Lena thought he was pulling a gun. Instead, it was a thick envelope of cash. He tossed it onto the counter. "For the damages," he said, "and for your silence. You saw nothing." It was not a request. The owner just nodded, pale and shaking. Then, the man's dark eyes found the table where Lena was hiding. He crouched down, moving with a surprising, fluid grace. He was now eye level with her, up close. His face was sharp, defined, and unsettlingly beautiful, but his eyes were empty of any warmth. He did not look at Lena. He looked past her, at the child still clinging to her. "Gia," he said, and his voice, for the first time, held a trace of something human. A rough, controlled softness. "It's all right. You can come out." The little girl peeked out, her face stained with tears. "Uncle Adrian?" She scrambled out from under Lena's protection and ran to him, burying her face in the fine wool of his jacket. He put a hand on her back, his touch surprisingly gentle, protective. He then looked at Lena, who was slowly, awkwardly, crawling out from under the table. Her knees were screaming in protest. "You're Lena Brooks," he said. It was a statement. Lena pushed her hair back, her hands shaking violently now that the adrenaline was fading. How do you know my name?" "I know everything about this cafe. I've been watching it for a week." "Watching her?" He nodded toward Gia, who was hiding her face. "She likes your smile." He stood to his full height, forcing Lena to crane her neck to look up at him. He loomed over her, a figure of absolute authority. "Come with me," he said. Lena's sarcastic defenses, her only armor, snapped back into place. "I'm sorry. Did you hit your head? I'm not going anywhere with you. I just saw you. Your friend. Take two men apart, and you are not safe anymore," he said, as if she had not spoken. "Those men were from a rival family. They were targeting Gia's father, who was supposed to be here. They saw your face. They saw you protect her. To them, you are now a witness, a loose end. They will be back for you." Lena's blood ran cold. "The police! I'll call the police!" A flicker of something, amusement, pity crossed his face. "The police cannot protect you from these people. I can—" He looked around the wrecked cafe, at her stained apron. "I'm offering you a job, at my estate. You will work for me as part of my house staff. You will be paid well, and you will be safe." Lena was trembling, overwhelmed, the audacity of it, the sheer terrifying power. "I'm a waitress. I'm not. I don't know what you are." "My name is Adrian Moretti," he said, and the name seemed to hang in the air, heavy and significant, though it meant nothing to her. "And I owe you a debt for protecting my niece. I do not like to be in debt. You have 1 hour. My driver will wait." He turned, and with Gia held close to his chest, he walked out of the cafe and into a black sedan that had materialized at the curb, a car so sleek and dark it looked like a shadow. For a full minute, Lena just stood there, shaking, in the ruins of her life. Then she grabbed her jacket and her empty tip jar and ran out the back door. The driver, a mountain of a man in a dark suit, was waiting in the alley. He didn't follow her, just watched. Lena's apartment was 3 blocks away. Up 4 flights of crumbling stairs, the hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and mold. She fumbled with her key, her hands still shaking, and pushed the door open. The single bulb in her kitchen flickered, illuminating the reality she'd just been offered an escape from. On the small, cracked counter, next to a half-eaten box of crackers, were the letters, the bright red of the eviction notice, finalized, the pale blue of the past due electric bill, the stark white of the final warning from her student loan servicer. She opened the fridge, a half-empty carton of milk and a single, questionable egg. Her pride screamed at her to run, to hide, to call the police and hope for the best. To not, under any circumstances, get into a car with a man who disposed of bodies and spoke of rival families, but her hunger, her fear, and the cold, damp misery of her life spoke louder. That eviction notice was not a threat. It was a promise. By Monday, she would be on the street, and Adrian Moretti was right. Those men had seen her. She was 25 years old, and her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She grabbed her only suitcase, a battered canvas thing with a broken zipper, and threw in the few clothes she owned. Her mother's photograph, her toothbrush. She walked back down the stairs, out into the rain. The black sedan was waiting at the end of the alley. A silent, dark promise. The driver got out and opened the back door for her. Adrian Moretti was inside, sitting opposite her. He had changed his jacket. The one Gia had cried on was gone. He just looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable in the dim light of the car. The interior smelled of expensive leather and something clean, like cold night air. Lena slid in, placing the suitcase at her feet. She did not look at him. She looked straight ahead. "I'll take the job," she said, her voice small but firm. "On one condition." He said nothing. He just waited, his stillness a heavy presence in the car. Lena forced herself to meet his gaze. "You're not allowed to touch me. I'll work, I'll clean, or serve food, or whatever it is you have me do. But that's it. No. Other part of the job. Understood?" She hated how the question trembled at the end, revealing her fear. Adrian Moretti stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The car was silent save for the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. She saw his jaw tighten, just once. He seemed to be considering her words, or perhaps her, with a strange, detached intensity. Then he looked away, out his window at the rain-slicked, impoverished streets of her neighborhood. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and devoid of all emotion. "I wouldn't know how anyway." The car pulled away from the curb, leaving Lena's old life behind in the rain. The drive was long, taking them from the grit of the city to a part of town she had only ever seen in magazines. High stone walls, iron gates, and houses that were more like fortresses. The Moretti estate was the last and largest, set at the end of a long, winding drive, surrounded by dark, imposing trees. The house itself was a monstrosity of dark stone and glass, beautiful in a cold, severe way. It looked less like a home and more like a museum. A quiet, older woman in a gray uniform, the housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, met her at the door. She showed Lena to a small, clean room in a staff wing. It was simple, but the sheets were clean, and the window overlooked a vast, dark garden. It was the nicest room Lena had ever slept in, and it felt like a prison cell. "Mr. Moretti takes his dinner at 9, the housekeeper said, her voice clipped and professional. You will begin your duties tomorrow. For tonight, you are not to leave this wing. But Lena couldn't sleep. Her stomach ached with hunger, and her mind was spinning. The silence of the mansion was eerie. It was a rich, deep, empty silence that felt 1,000 times heavier than the familiar sounds of her old, crumbling apartment building. After an hour, driven by a gnawing hunger and a desperate need to understand where she was, she crept out of her room. The house was vast. Marble floors echoed her soft footsteps. Most of the rooms were dark, the furniture covered in pale dust sheets, like ghosts. She found the dining room. It was absurdly large, with a polished mahogany table long enough to seat 20 people. At the very end of it, a single place was set. Adrian Moretti sat there, eating a simple meal of what looked like soup and bread. He was entirely, profoundly alone. He was in his shirt sleeves now, his suit jacket gone, his tie loosened. He looked younger, and somehow even more isolated. Lena stood in the shadows of the doorway, watching him. He ate with a slow, deliberate precision, his gaze fixed on nothing. He did not look up. He did not seem to know she was there. She retreated, her heart pounding a new, strange rhythm of confusion and fear. She went back to her room and locked the door, a flimsy piece of wood that felt useless in a house of stone and secrets. Who was this man who commanded such violence and then ate his dinner alone in the dark? What had she done? What had she agreed to? Lena Brooks lay awake for a very long time, listening to the heavy, rich silence of the Moretti mansion, drowning in questions that had no answers. Life at the Moretti estate was a study in contradictions. Lena woke up to the sound of silence, a thick, plush quiet that was far more unnerving than the sirens and shouting of her old neighborhood. She ate 3 meals a day, good meals, served in the staff kitchen, and for the first time in her adult life, she was not hungry. She had a warm bed, a locked door, and the crushing, oppressive weight of knowing she was a bird in a very expensive cage. Her duties were varied and vague. She reported to Mrs. Davies, the head housekeeper, a woman who moved with the silent efficiency of a shadow and seemed to disapprove of Lena's very existence. Lena polished silver that was never used, dusted furniture in rooms that were never entered, and folded linens that were softer than any clothes she had ever owned. The most complicated part of her day was serving Adrian. She never ate with him. He took his breakfast and dinner alone, precisely at 7 in the morning and 9 at night, at the head of that impossibly long mahogany table. It was her job, and hers alone, to bring him his coffee and remove his plates. He never spoke. He never looked up. She might as well have been a ghost, another part of the silent, empty house, but the true center of the estate, the only flicker of warmth in the cold, cavernous space, was Gia, the little girl, his niece, was there part-time, under the care of a rotating staff. Lena found herself assigned to help, mostly just to keep Gia company. The child was quiet, still haunted by the event at the cafe, but she had attached herself to Lena with a fierce loyalty. She would follow Lena on her rounds, her small hand clutching the hem of Lena's uniform. "Are you scared of Uncle Adrian?" Gia asked one afternoon while they were stacking wooden blocks in the nursery. Lena paused, a red block in her hand. "He's my boss, sweetie. It's different. Everyone's scared of him," Gia whispered, not looking up. "He doesn't smile." "Some people just smile on the inside," Lena offered weakly, knowing it was a lie. She saw him with Gia sometimes. He was awkward. He would stand in the doorway of the nursery, watching. He didn't know how to play. He would pat her head, a stiff, formal gesture, before turning and disappearing back into the shadows of the house. He was a man who knew how to command, how to threaten, and how to end a fight. But he had no idea how to hold a 6-year-old's hand. One night, nearly 2 weeks into her new life, Lena was prowling the halls. Sleep never came easily here. The silence buzzed under her skin. She was on her way to the kitchen for water when she heard it, the faint sound of dialogue, tinny and old-fashioned. She followed the sound down a carpeted hallway to a pair of large oak doors. One was cracked open just an inch. She peered through. It was a library, or maybe a private theater. The walls were lined with books, and a large screen was lit at the far end. In a single, deep, leather armchair sat Adrian Moretti. He was alone, a glass of water on the table beside him. He was watching a black-and-white film. A man and a woman were on a rain-slicked street, the music swelling. It was intensely romantic. Lena watched for a full minute, stunned. This man, who moved like a panther and spoke with the finality of a judge, was watching a romance movie, alone, in the dark. She must have shifted her weight, because the floorboard beneath her creaked. He didn't jump. He didn't even turn his head. He just stiffened, his entire body going rigid. "What is it?" His voice was cold, annoyed at the interruption. Lena pushed the door open, her old sarcasm bubbling up before she could stop it. "Sorry to interrupt. Mr. Moretti, I was just getting some water. Didn't realize it was movie night." He finally turned his head. His face was unreadable in the flickering light from the screen. She stepped inside, emboldened by his strange vulnerability. "I have to say, this isn't what I expected. I'd have pegged you for a Godfather marathon. Maybe some old gangster flicks, not this." She gestured to the screen, where the couple was now embracing. "I don't know what you mean," he said, his voice flat. "A softie," Lena said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Under all that steel, you're just a big softie, aren't you?" He looked at her. His gaze was so intense it felt physical, like a hand pressing against her chest. The silence stretched, and her smile faded. The air in the room grew thick. "I've never kissed anyone," he said. His voice was quiet, a bare murmur, but it hit Lena like a physical blow. She blinked, certain she had misheard. "What? I've never kissed anyone," he repeated, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've never wanted to." He paused, and his gaze dropped, just for a second, to her mouth. Until lately, Lena's breath hitched. A cold shock ran down her spine. She tried to laugh, a dry, nervous sound. "Right, good one, Mr. Moretti. The big bad wolf is scared of a little kiss. You almost had me." She was backing toward the door, but his expression stopped her. It was not a joke. His face was stripped bare of all pretense. There was no power, no menace, just a raw, stark, and deeply unsettling honesty. He was 33 years old, a man who commanded fear with a single look, and he was telling her the truth. "Oh," she whispered. "My God, you're serious." He said nothing. He just turned back to the screen, where the credits were rolling. "Good night, Lena." It was a dismissal. She fled. After that night, she saw him differently. Everything he did was reframed through that one. Impossible confession. She started to observe him, truly observe him. She saw how he recoiled from casual touch. When Gia ran to him, he would pat her head, his hand hovering for a second before making contact, as if the very act required immense concentration. He never shook hands with his men. He nodded. He never brushed past anyone in the hall. He always kept a precise, calculated distance. His loneliness was no longer a simple observation. It was a physical thing, a room he carried with him. He ate his meals at that vast, empty table, staring at the seat opposite him as if it were occupied by a ghost. Lena would bring him his plate, her hand trembling slightly, and for the first time, he would look up. He wouldn't look at her face. He would look at her hands. He would watch her set the plate down, his eyes tracking the movement, as if proximity to another human being was a phenomenon he was still studying. His quiet stares, which she had once interpreted as cold authority, now felt different. They felt like hunger, a desperate, starved curiosity. She became obsessed with the why. Why had he built this fortress around himself? One clear, cold morning, the routine was broken. Adrian found her in the kitchen, where she was helping Gia cut toast into star shapes. "Get your coats," he said, not to Lena, but to his niece. "We're going out." "Out where?" Gia chirped. "The museum. You said you wanted to see the mummies." "Can Lena come?" Gia asked, grabbing Lena's hand. Adrian looked at Lena. It wasn't a question. "You'll come, Mrs. Davies can spare you." The black sedan was waiting. This time. Lena sat in the back with Gia, who chattered excitedly about ancient Egypt. Adrian sat in the front, silent, his driver navigating the city. The art museum was one of the city's largest, a grand building of stone and pillars. When they arrived, the massive front steps were completely empty. There were no lines, no school groups. Lena looked around as they walked into the echoing grand hall. It was silent, empty. "Is it closed?" Lena whispered, her voice bouncing off the marble. "Did they have a gas leak or something?" Adrian didn't look at her. He was already walking toward the antiquities wing. "I rented it for the morning." Lena stopped. You rented the museum?" "Gia doesn't like crowds," he said, as if this were the most normal explanation in the world. "And I don't like complications." He was using his power and his wealth not to acquire things, but to acquire emptiness, to buy solitude. Gia ran ahead, her small footsteps echoing, her voice bright as she called back about a statue. Lena and Adrian were left alone, standing in the middle of a gallery filled with Renaissance portraits. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, and for a day at the museum, a silk tie. He was looking at a painting of a woman, his expression thoughtful. Lena, acting on an impulse she didn't understand, found herself studying him instead of the art. His tie was slightly crooked. The knot was just a fraction to the left. Before she could second-guess herself, before the fear could stop her, she stepped closer to him. "Your tie," she murmured. He stiffened, his head snapping toward her. They were close. Close enough for her to see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, to smell the faint, clean scent of expensive soap and wool. "It's crooked," she whispered. She lifted her hands. He didn't move. He just watched her, his body absolutely rigid, as if he were carved from the same marble as the statues around them. Her fingers brushed the silk of the tie, then the starched cotton of his shirt, just below his throat. The warmth of his skin radiated through the fabric. It was the first time she had ever touched him. She adjusted the knot, her movements slow, her heart hammering against her ribs. His eyes were locked on her face, his gaze burning. She could feel his breath, and it was coming short and fast. She smoothed the fabric down. Her fingers grazed the hard line of his collarbone. His breath hitched, a sharp, audible intake of air. He jerked back. It was not a gentle movement. It was a violent recoil, as if she had burned him with a hot iron. "Don't," he whispered, his voice rough, laced with a panic she had never heard. He turned, his shoulders tense, and strode out of the gallery, leaving her alone with the portraits of long-dead women. Lena stood there, her hands still tingling, her stomach twisting with a confusing mix of fear, pity, and a strange, unwelcome flutter of attraction. That night, she couldn't settle. The incident at the museum played over and over in her mind. His panic, his breathlessness, her own strange lack of fear in that moment. She was supposed to be bringing him his nightly briefing, a thin file of household expenditures that Mrs. Davies insisted he review. She walked to his office, a room she had never entered, and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. "Mr. Moretti?" Still silence. She tried the handle. It was unlocked. She pushed the door open. The room was dark, save for a single green-shaded lamp on a massive desk. The room smelled of old leather, paper, and him. He wasn't there. She placed the file on his desk, but her eyes were drawn to a large, leather-bound book lying open. It wasn't a ledger. It was a sketchbook. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, made her look. The page was filled with charcoal sketches, quick, deft lines, a study of a hand, a sketch of the garden fountain. And then, she saw it. It was her. She flipped the page, and again it was a sketch of her, asleep in a chair in the staff lounge, her mouth slightly open, another of her at the cafe, her face tight with sarcasm as she took an order, and one, clearly from today, of her in the gallery, her head tilted, looking up at the painting, her expression soft and unguarded. He hadn't just been staring, he had been studying, memorizing. "What are you doing in here?" Lena gasped, dropping the book. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Adrian Moretti stood in the doorway, a shadow against the hall light. He was in his shirt sleeves, his expression dark and unreadable. He moved into the room, his silence more threatening than any shout. I brought the file," Lena stammered, her face flushing with guilt. "I saw the book. I'm sorry." He didn't look at the file. He looked at the open sketchbook on the floor, at the drawing of her face. Lena's fear was suddenly eclipsed by a wave of hot, confusing emotion, anger, vulnerability. "Why?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Why are you drawing me? Why were you watching me at the cafe? Why me?" He bent down, picked up the book, and closed it. Placing it on the desk, he turned to her, his composure absolute, but his eyes were burning. "Because you're not afraid of me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I am terrified of you," she cried, the words bursting out of her. You're dangerous. You know you are." "No," he said, and he took a step closer. She didn't back away. "You're afraid of my world. You're afraid of what I can do. But you—" He took another step. He was in front of her now, so close she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "You look at me. You see me. Everyone else looks away. You're the one who watched me first," she whispered, her breath catching. "I couldn't look away," he admitted, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. The tension in the room was a tangible thing. It was in the air she was struggling to breathe, in the space between their bodies. He lifted a hand, his movement slow, agonizing, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He was giving her time to run. She stayed rooted to the spot. His fingers, long and scarred at the knuckles, came to her face. He didn't touch her. Not yet. They hovered, a fraction of an inch from her skin. "Lena," he breathed. He finally let his thumb graze her cheekbone. His touch was hesitant, rough, and unbelievably gentle. Lena's eyes fluttered shut. She leaned into the touch, just a fraction, a silent surrender. His other hand came up, cupping her jaw. He was going to kiss her. She knew it, and in that moment, she wanted him to. He tilted her head up. She could feel his breath on her lips. He stopped. His whole body went rigid. His hand, which had been so gentle, began to tremble. A look of sharp, profound pain crossed his features. He looked haunted. He snatched his hands back as if he'd been electrocuted. He stepped away from her, turning his back, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "Get out," he said. The words were choked, cold and final. Lena stood there for a second, breathless, confused, and aching. "I said, get out," he roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. Lena flinched, the spell broken. She turned and ran from the office, not stopping until she was back in her own room. The flimsy lock turned, her back pressed against the wood, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. The night of the near kiss in the office changed nothing. And yet, it changed everything. The air in the mansion, once just thick with silence, now crackled with an unspoken, agonizing tension. When Lena saw Adrian in the halls, he didn't just ignore her, he looked through her. The impassive mask was back, but it was colder now. Forged of something harder than steel, the shift in her duties was immediate and brutal. Mrs. Davies, her face as impassive as her employer's, met Lena in the staff kitchen the next morning. "Miss Brooks," she said, her voice crisp, "your services will no longer be required in the nursery. Gia is well-staffed. You will also cease serving Mr. Moretti his meals." Lena's stomach clenched. "Did I do something wrong?" "Mr. Moretti requires a more specialized, focused staff," the housekeeper replied, which was not an answer. "You will be assigned to the West Wing, polishing the silver and maintaining the archival furniture. The West Wing, the part of the house that was covered in dust sheets, the rooms no one ever entered. It was a banishment." He was sending her to the coldest, most isolated part of his cold, isolated home. The hurt was a sharp, physical sting. It was ridiculous. He was her boss. He was a dangerous, terrifying man who had all but admitted to being a virgin. He had pulled her close and then roared at her to get out. Why should she care if he exiled her to dust sheet ghosts? But she did. She cared because of the look in his eyes before he'd broken. She cared because of the sketches. She cared because the gentleness in his near touch had felt more real than the coldness he wore now. For a week, she worked in silence. She polished silver tureens that would never hold soup and dusted chairs that would never be sat in. She was a ghost tending to other ghosts. She ate her meals in the staff kitchen, where the other workers gave her a wide berth, sensing she had fallen from their silent master's favor. The only person who spoke to her was Gia, who snuck away from her nanny one afternoon and found Lena in the long, dark gallery. "Why don't you play with me anymore?" Gia asked, her small voice echoing in the cavernous room. Lena knelt, her heart aching. "Your uncle. He just has me doing other work. Sweetie, it's very important work. Polishing." Gia wrinkled her nose. "He's sad again. Everyone's whispering. He's been in his office for 2 days. Sad?" Lena asked, her curiosity stronger than her caution. "And mad," Gia whispered, leaning in. "A man brought him a present. It was in a box. It was a bird." Lena's blood chilled. "A bird? A dead one," Gia said, her eyes wide. "It made Uncle very, very mad. He broke the box." A message. Lena stood up, a cold dread settling over her. A dead bird, a warning. This was the world she was in. This was the man who had almost... That night, the house was even more suffocating than usual. Lena couldn't sleep. The silence had a new edge, a new quality of danger. She was walking in the staff corridor, heading for the kitchen, when she heard voices, low, male and urgent, coming from the service stairs that led up to the main hall. She pressed herself into an alcove, her heart hammering. "He's moved on it. The Caprellis are getting bold." It was the voice of the driver, the large man who had brought her here. "The boss is not happy," another voice rumbled. "This distraction has made them think he's soft." "He's not soft," the driver said. "He's focused. The Caprelli problem is being handled. The shipment to the docks on Friday, it's been rerouted, permanently. And the package?" There was a pause. Lena held her breath. "The package will be lost in transit," the driver said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Along with anyone who tries to sign for it." Lena's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. They weren't talking about a shipment of goods. They weren't talking about a lost box, a shipment, a package, lost in transit. They were talking about a hit. They were talking about killing someone. The cold, efficient power she had seen at the cafe was not just defensive. It was offensive. It was ruthless. Adrian Moretti, the man who watched old movies and couldn't kiss a woman, ordered people to be lost. And she was the distraction, the dead bird. Gia's words slammed into her, a message about her. They knew he was distracted by a woman, his coldness, his banishment of her to the West Wing. It wasn't because he was hurt, it was because he was seen. She was his liability. She was the weak point his enemies had found. The hurt she had felt was instantly burned away by a hot, acid wave of fear and betrayal. She was a fool, a stupid, naive fool. She had been brought here not for her protection, but because she was a complication. And now, her presence was inviting more danger, more dead birds, more lost packages. She felt used. She felt like one of his sketches, something to be looked at and then put away in a dark room. She fled back to her room, her mind racing, her pride, the same pride that had nearly kept her in her starving, cold apartment came roaring back to life, but this time it was fueled by terror. She was not safe here. She'd never been safe here. This house was the center of the danger. She pulled her battered canvas suitcase from under the bed. She threw her few belongings into it, her 2 staff uniforms, her 1 pair of jeans, her mother's photograph. She didn't have a plan. She would walk. She would hitchhike. She would go back to her old neighborhood and beg Mr. Sokolov for an extension, find another job, sleep in a shelter if she had to. Anything was better than being a pawn in a game where people were lost. She zipped the bag, her hands shaking so hard she could barely do it. She opened her door and crept down the staff corridor. The house was silent. It was well after midnight. She made it through the main hall, a vast space of marble and shadows. She reached the towering front doors. She fumbled with the complex lock, her fingers clumsy with panic, and finally pulled it open, slipping out into the night. The rain was back, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked her instantly, but she didn't care. She ran down the long, gravel drive, her suitcase bumping awkwardly against her leg. She reached the massive, wrought-iron gates. They were, of course, locked, a solid 10-foot wall of black metal. She was a prisoner. "You were not given permission to leave," Lena screamed, spinning around, her suitcase dropping to the gravel with a thud. Adrian Moretti stepped out from the deep shadow of the gatehouse. He was wearing a dark overcoat, his hands buried in his pockets. He looked as if he had been waiting for her. "Let me go," she panted, her voice trembling with rage and fear. "Let me out of here. You're not safe out there." His voice was calm, a stark contrast to her panic. "Safe?" she shrieked, the word tearing out of her. "I am not safe in here. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know what's going on? A dead bird, a distraction? Lost packages? You're a monster." His face, pale in the moonlight, tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know that I'm a target because of you. I know that you kill people, and I know that you've been lying to me from the second I got in your car." She was sobbing now, hot tears of fury mixing with the cold rain. "You exiled me to the West Wing, not because you were anything, but because you were protecting yourself. Because I'm a weakness, and I will not be your weakness." She grabbed the bars of the gate, shaking them uselessly. "Open this gate, or I will scream until someone calls the police." "I told you," he said, taking a step closer. "The police cannot help you. The men I'm protecting you from, they are the Caprellis. They sent that bird. It was a picture of you, from the museum, wrapped around its neck." Lena's stomach turned to ice. "A picture? Of me?" "They know I'm distracted," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. "And in my world, distractions get people killed. They get women killed." He was in front of her now, the iron bars separating them. "If you leave these gates," he said, his voice raw, "they will find you, and they will hurt you. Not to get to me, just to prove that they can, and I—" His voice broke, just for a second. "I cannot protect you out there." Lena stared at him, her chest heaving. "Then why?" she whispered, her anger collapsing into a painful, desperate confusion. "Why me? Why bring me here? Why draw me? Why almost kiss me and then throw me away like I'm nothing?" She sank to her knees on the wet gravel, her fight gone. "I demand the truth, Adrian, not the half-truths, not the silence, all of it, or I swear, I will climb this gate if I have to." He stood there for a long time, the rain plastering his dark hair to his head. He looked up at the dark, imposing house, then back at her. A woman kneeling in the mud at his feet. He unlocked the gate, pushed it open just enough to step through, and locked it again, trapping them both on the outside. He crouched down in front of her, the rain running down his face. "The truth," he said, his voice tasting of rain and bitterness. "My parents were murdered, not in a clean way. It was a message from a rival. I was 15. They made me watch." Lena gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "I took over the family," he continued, his eyes hollow, staring at a past she couldn't see. "And I learned the first rule, the only rule. You cannot have connections. You cannot have anything that can be taken." "Chia," Lena whispered, "my brother's child." He nodded. "Her father is reckless. He's my only family. But even her, I keep my distance. I have to, because they're always watching. The first woman I ever liked, when I was 19, they sent me her picture. Just a picture, and a note. She has beautiful eyes. It would be a shame to lose them. I left her that night, never spoke to her again. I made sure she was hated, so she would be safe." He finally looked at her, his gaze so full of a profound, agonizing loneliness that it stole her breath. "My isolation isn't a choice. Lena, it's a cage. Every person I've ever let in has been used as a weapon against me, and touch." He shook his head, a look of deep-seated fear in his eyes. Touch is a promise. It's a connection for me. It's a liability. It's the one thing I can never, ever have. It's how they get in. It's how they win. He stood up, pulling her to her feet. He was so close. She could feel the cold dampness of his overcoat. "I put you in the West Wing to protect you," he said, his voice fierce. "To make them think you were nothing to me. To make you just another servant." But it didn't work. They already knew. They saw it at the museum. "Saw what?" she breathed. "The way I looked at you," he confessed, his voice dropping to a tormented whisper. "And I don't know what this is. I don't have a name for it. It's not love. It's an ache. It's this need, and I don't know what to do with it. You're the first person who's ever made me wish I were someone else, a different man, a man who could touch his tie, a man who could—" He couldn't finish. The rain, the silence, the weight of his confession hung between them. Lena's anger was gone. Her fear was gone. All that was left was this man, this beautifully, terribly broken man, who had lived a life so cold she couldn't even imagine it. He wasn't a monster. He was a prisoner. They were standing in a dark, narrow hallway just inside the front doors. He'd unlocked them, leading her back inside, out of the rain. Her suitcase sat in a puddle by the door. The house was silent. She looked up at him, at his dark, haunted eyes, at his mouth, which she now knew had never been kissed. She stepped closer. The softy from the library, the man who sketched her in secret, the boy who had watched his parents die. Her voice was barely a whisper, so soft she wasn't sure she'd even said it. "You've never been kissed." He didn't move. He didn't even seem to be breathing. He just watched her, his vulnerability a raw, open wound. He gave a single, jerky nod. He was breathless, waiting, terrified. Lena's own lips were trembling. She didn't know what she was doing. She was a waitress. He was a mafia boss who ordered people lost. But in this hallway, he was just a man who was starving. She lifted her hands, her movements slow, letting him see them. She cupped his face. His skin was cold from the rain, but he was trembling under her touch. He didn't pull away. He didn't recoil. He just let her. She rose on her toes, her eyes locked with his. She leaned in. She pressed her lips to his. It was not a fiery, demanding kiss. It was slow. It was warm. It was, more than anything, gentle. His lips were firm, inexperienced, and utterly still. He was frozen, a man of marble. She didn't demand a response. She just gave. She held the kiss, a soft, lingering pressure, offering a warmth he had never known. She poured every ounce of her empathy, her pity, her own confusing, aching need into that simple, chaste press of her mouth to his. And then it happened. A shudder ran through him. It was a deep, visceral tremor, as if a foundation were cracking. A small, broken sound escaped his throat. Lost against her mouth, his lips, which had been so rigid, softened. He melted. He didn't kiss her back. He didn't know how, but he leaned into her, a fraction of an inch, a silent surrender. His hands, which had been clenched at his sides, slowly came up and rested on her arms. His grip hesitant, as if he were holding on for dear life. It was like breathing for the first time. It was like a man dying of thirst being given a single drop of water. Lena pulled back, slowly. His eyes were still closed. His whole body was trembling. He kept his hands on her arms, as if she were the only thing holding him upright. When he finally opened his eyes, he looked lost, stunned, dazed. The cold, hard mask of Adrian Moretti was gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces. He lifted his fingers, the ones that had sketched her face, and gently, reverently, touched his own lips. He looked at her, his dark eyes wide and shimmering with an emotion she had never seen. "Now," he whispered, his voice rough and thick, "I'll never forget you." The kiss in the rain-soaked hallway had drawn a line in the sand. The life before, of a cold master and a silent servant, was over. The life after was a new, undefined territory, and Adrian Moretti was a terrible navigator. He became warmer, but it was the hesitant warmth of a man stepping into the sun for the first time. He was still distant, still encased in a lifetime of solitude, but he was trying. The changes were small, almost imperceptible. He no longer ate at the far end of the 30-foot table while she stood in the doorway. The morning after the kiss, she found him sitting at the middle of the table, a second place setting opposite him. He didn't command her to sit. He just looked at the empty chair until she, confused, took it. They ate in silence for 10 minutes, the only sound the clink of silver on porcelain. "It is still raining," he finally said, his voice rough, as if he hadn't used it in days. Lena looked up from her toast. "Yes, it is." He nodded, apparently satisfied with the exchange, and retreated back into his quiet, but he watched her. He watched her spread jam on her toast. He watched her sip her coffee. His observation, once cold and analytical, now held a bewildered, gentle curiosity. Lena found herself falling, and the sensation was terrifying. It was a slow, agonizing slide into something she had no control over. She was falling for a man who was two people. One was the gentle, haunted boy who sketched her face and trembled at her touch. The other was a cold-blooded killer who ordered men lost. She was falling for the prisoner and the jailer, trapped in the same body. The small moments became her lifeline. One afternoon, she was in the library, the one where she had first seen him watching the movie. She was there to dust, but she had picked up a heavy book of poetry. He found her there, her finger tracing a line on the page. He brought her a cup of tea. He didn't call for a maid. He carried the steaming cup himself, his large, scarred hand unsteady. "You'll stain your fingers on the ink," he said, offering her the cup. Their hands brushed as she took it. It was the lightest, most fleeting contact, but he flinched, pulling his hand back. Yet he didn't leave. He stood there, watching her drink the tea, a small, pained frown on his face. He was learning to override the instinct that screamed at him to run. Another day. It was raining. It was always raining. She was walking in the garden under the covered stone arcade when he appeared from the house, holding a single, large black umbrella. "You're needed in the main house," he said. "I can walk under the arcade. I won't get wet." He ignored her, stepping out into the downpour and opening the umbrella. He held it, waiting. It was a silent invitation. She stepped out from the shelter and stood beside him. The space under the umbrella was small, forcing them shoulder to shoulder. His overcoat was rough against her arm. She could smell the clean, cold scent of him. He held the umbrella over her, his own shoulder getting soaked by the rain, and they walked the 100 yards to the house in a shared, intimate silence. When they reached the door, he closed the umbrella, shaking the water from it. A few drops had landed on her face, and a strand of dark hair was plastered to her cheek. Before she could move, he lifted his hand, slowly. He didn't hover this time. He deliberately, gently, tucked the wet strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers, rough from scars but surprisingly warm, lingered for a half-second against her skin. She stopped breathing. "Adrian," she whispered. He looked at his own hand, then at her, as if amazed at the simple act. He cleared his throat and stepped back, the mask of the boss sliding back into place. "Mrs. Davies is waiting," but the mask was flawed now. She could see the cracks. The piece, fragile as it was, shattered a week later. Lena had been granted limited privileges. She was allowed to use a phone in the staff lounge to check on her affairs. She called her old landlord, Mr. Sokolov, braced for a barrage of threats. "Ah, Miss Brooks," he said, his voice oily and cheerful. "So good to hear from you. We were worried. Mr. Sokolov, I need an extension. I can pay. I have a job. I just need extension. My dear, you are all paid up. A gentleman came by. A very quiet, very well-dressed gentleman, paid your entire lease, 6 months in cash, and your delinquent utility bills, and that nasty student loan. All of it, wiped clean. Must be a very good friend, yes?" Lena's blood turned to ice. She dropped the receiver into its cradle, her hand shaking. She didn't walk. She ran. She stormed through the mansion past a startled Mrs. Davies and didn't bother to knock on his office door. She slammed it open, making the heavy oak shudder in its frame. Adrian was at his desk. On the phone, he looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. "I will call you back," he said into the receiver, and hung up. "You," she seethed, marching to his desk. "Lena, what's wrong? You paid it. You paid it all." His face shuddered. He stood up slowly, the warmth of the past weeks gone, replaced by a defensive coldness. "It was a problem. I solved it." "A problem? You think I'm a problem you can solve with cash?" she yelled, slamming her hands on his desk. "My debts, my rent, that was my life. You had no right." "They were a weakness," he said, his voice a low growl. "A chain. They could have been used against you, against me. I was protecting my asset." "Asset?" The word hit her like a slap. "Is that what I am? An asset? After everything? The kiss? Was that just you sealing a transaction?" His face went pale, a flash of genuine, deep hurt in his eyes. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No. How could you?" "How could I? You buy my life. You hide it from me, and you call me an asset. You think you own me now? Is that it? I'm just another one of your pretty, empty rooms? I kept it hidden because I didn't want you to feel owned," he finally roared, the sound exploding from him. He swept a stack of papers from his desk, his control shattering. "I kept it hidden because in my world, money is ownership. It is a chain. I didn't want you to look at me and think that what happened in the hall was payment." He was breathing heavily, his hands clenched. "I wanted you to be free. Debt is a prison, Lena. I was setting you free. I thought it was a kind. I don't know how to do this," he finished, his voice breaking, full of a frustration so deep it bordered on despair. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a wave of profound, aching understanding. He hadn't been buying her. He had been disarming her. In his world, where everything was a weapon, her poverty was a gun pointed at her head. He had just removed it. It was his way of showing he cared. It was clumsy. It was transactional. And it was the most vulnerable, honest thing he had ever done. "Oh, Adrian," she whispered, her voice thick. She walked around the desk, her anger gone, her heart aching for him. He stood rigid, watching her, terrified. She stopped in front of him. "You should have told me. I don't know how," he admitted, his gaze falling to the floor. To give, without it being a transaction." She lifted her hand, not to his face, but to his chest, resting her palm over his heart. She could feel it hammering, a frantic, trapped rhythm. "You just talk like this. You just tell me." He covered her hand with his touch desperate, his gaze lifting to meet hers. "Lena." The fight had left the air charged, raw with exposed emotion. He didn't ask this time. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the chaste, gentle press of the first kiss. It was deep, and it was hungry, and it was full of all the rage and fear and confusion of the last 5 minutes. His mouth claimed hers, a desperate, clumsy exploration. He didn't know what he was doing, but he was learning. Fast. She kissed him back, pouring all her forgiveness, all her own aching need into it. Her hands moved from his chest, up his shoulders, to his hair, her fingers gripping the thick, dark strands. A low groan rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated need. He pulled her flush against him, one arm banding around her waist like steel, the other hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, angling her for a deeper kiss. He backed her against the wall, his body pressing her into the hard wood and leather-bound books. It was overwhelming. He was everywhere, his mouth, his hands, the solid, warm wall of his body. He was breathless, kissing her with a frantic energy, as if he expected her to be taken away at any second. She felt his hand tremble as it moved from her waist, slowly, agonizingly, up her side. He was asking permission at every step. His thumb brushed the side of her breast, and she gasped into his mouth. He deepened the kiss, his hand moving to the buttons of her blouse. His fingers, usually so deft, fumbled with the first button. He was shaking. He got it undone. his knuckles brushing the warm skin of her collarbone. He tore his mouth from hers, both of them panting, their foreheads pressed together. He was trembling violently, his eyes shut tight. "Stop," he whispered. His voice choked. Lena's own head was spinning. "What? Adrian, I'm ruining this," he panted, his hand still on her blouse, his whole body rigid. It's too fast. I'm rushing. This is how I break things." He pulled back, his face a mask of panic and self-loathing. He looked at her swollen lips and the undone button, and he looked terrified. He was terrified of himself. Lena reached up, her own hand shaking, and covered his. She pressed his palm flat against her chest, over her racing heart. She was flushed, breathless, and more certain of this than she had ever been of anything. "You won't," she whispered. His eyes met hers, wide and full of a desperate hope, before he could move, before he could kiss her again. His phone buzzed on the desk, a harsh, electronic sound that shattered the moment. He flinched, as if shot. The spell was broken. The boss was back. He stepped away from her, turning to the phone, his back a rigid wall of muscle. Lena, shaky and cold, quickly fixed her button. Adrian's voice was ice. "What is it?" He listened. "Where?" "No, she stays here. Lock it down, I'll handle it." He hung up and turned to her. The man who had been trembling against her was gone. This was the stranger from the cafe. "What's wrong?" Lena asked. "The Caprellis," he said, his voice flat. "They made a move. On the docks, it's fine. It's being handled." He wouldn't look at her. He was already shrugging into his suit jacket, checking a drawer in his desk. The moment was over. Lost. The next few days were tense. Adrian was gone, swallowed by his dark business. When he returned, he was cold, silent, and distant. The warmth of the past weeks snuffed out. Lena felt the loss keenly. She gave him space. She knew, now, that this retreat was his armor, to escape the oppressive silence of the house. She asked Mrs. Davies for an errand, anything, just to breathe air that wasn't stale with secrets. "Mr. Moretti has given you permission to visit the city market." "Mrs.?" Davies said stiffly, clearly disapproving. "You are to purchase tea, this specific kind." She handed Lena a piece of paper and a roll of cash. "The driver will take you and wait." The market was a burst of life. Colors, sounds, people. It felt wonderful. Lena took her time, buying the tea, smelling the spices, feeling, for just an hour, like a normal person. She was walking back to the car, her bag heavy with tea, when she felt it, the same prickle on her neck she'd felt at the cafe. She looked over her shoulder. A black van, parked illegally, 2 men, watching her. Her blood ran cold. She started walking faster. She heard a car door slide open. She heard fast footsteps on the pavement. She didn't look back. She ran. She dropped the bag of tea, the leaves scattering across the sidewalk, and sprinted, dodging through the crowd. She cut left, down a narrow alley she prayed wasn't a dead end. It was a high brick wall covered in graffiti. She spun around. The 2 men were blocking the entrance to the alley, advancing on her slowly. "Mr. Caprelli just wants to talk, little girl," one of them sneered, cracking his knuckles. "The boss has been rude. He needs to be taught a lesson about his property." Lena flattened herself against the wall, her heart hammering. "I'm not his property." "Close enough," the man said, and lunged. A black sedan, Adrian's sedan, screeched around the corner, mounting the curb and slamming into the alley, pinning the black van's door shut. The driver, the mountain of a man, was out before the car stopped moving. He moved with a speed that was terrifying, grabbing the first man and throwing him against the wall. The sound was a sickening crunch. The second man turned, pulling a knife, but Adrian was already there. He had come out the passenger side. He didn't make a sound. He moved in a blur of dark wool, disarmed the man, and struck him twice, hard. The man crumpled to the ground and did not move. It was over in 5 seconds. Lena was sliding down the wall, her legs giving out. Adrian stood over the 2 men, his chest heaving. He didn't even look at them. He turned to her, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. His knuckles were split and bleeding. He strode to her, grabbing her by the arms and hauling her to her feet, his grip painfully tight. He scanned her, his dark eyes frantic. "They touched you," he demanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Did they touch you?" "No," she whispered, shaking. "No, I'm okay." The rage in his eyes didn't fade, but his grip on her arms loosened, his hands becoming almost gentle. "Dante," he barked at the driver, "clean this up." He half dragged, half carried her to the car, pushing her into the back seat and climbing in after her. The car was moving before the door was fully shut. The drive back to the estate was silent, but it was a new kind of silence. It was the silence of a bomb about to detonate. Adrian sat beside her, not looking at her, his hands clenched on his knees, his bleeding knuckles stark white. He was vibrating with a controlled fury that scared her more than the men in the alley. He barked orders into his phone. "Full lockdown, no one in or out, double the perimeter. I want eyes on every wall. Now." He took her not to the staff wing, but to her old room, the small one near his. He walked her to the door, his face still a cold mask. She was shaking, the adrenaline fading, leaving her cold and sick. "Adrian, you are not to leave this room," he said, his voice flat. "A guard will be outside your door." She looked at him, at the blood on his hands, at the killer in his eyes, and she was, for the first time, a little afraid of him. He saw it. The rage in his face vanished, instantly replaced by that haunted, broken look. The man from the alley was gone. The man from the office was back. I... He started, his voice rough. He looked at her, then at the room, then back at her, helpless. He turned, grabbed a heavy armchair from the hallway, and dragged it into her room, placing it by the door. "What are you doing?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He just sat down in the chair, his dark overcoat still on, his bloody hands resting on his knees. "I'll be right here," he said, his voice quiet. You're not gonna sleep?" He looked at her, his eyes full of a darkness she couldn't comprehend. "They will not get to you again." He sat there all night. Lena got into bed, her clothes still on, and pulled the covers up to her chin. And in the dim light from the hallway, she watched him. He did not move. He did not sleep. He just sat, a dark, silent guardian, a statue of violence and protection, keeping watch over her bed. When Lena woke, it was not to silence, but to the scrape of boot heels on the marble floors downstairs. The Moretti mansion, once a cold, empty museum, had transformed overnight. It was now a fortress. Every window on the ground floor had been shuttered from the outside, plunging the house into a dim, artificial twilight. Men she had never seen before, dressed in dark, functional gear, patrolled the hallways. They were polite, but their eyes were cold, and they held themselves with a stillness that was not rest, but a coiled readiness. Lena was no longer a servant or a guest. She was precious cargo. A guard was stationed, as promised, outside her door. He nodded to her when she emerged, but his eyes never left the corridor. The tension was a physical thing, a metallic taste in the air. She found Gia in the nursery, being read a story by a tense-looking nanny. The little girl ran to Lena, her face pale. "Why are the windows sleeping?" she asked, her voice a small tremble. "The sun is just playing a game." "Sweetie?" Lena lied, her own heart hammering. She held Gia, the child's small, warm body a stark contrast to the cold fear in the house. She knew she couldn't hide. She had to find him. She left Gia with the nanny and walked, with a purpose she did not feel, to his office. 2 guards stood outside. They parted for her without a word. The office was a war room. The sketches were gone. The leather-bound books were pushed aside. In their place were maps of the city, satellite printouts, and a bank of phones, all of them muted, their lights blinking like angry red eyes. Adrian stood at the center of it, not in a suit, but in a simple black Henley and dark trousers. He was the man from the alley again, cold, focused, deadly. He was on the phone, his voice a low, clipped monotone. "No, not the warehouse. The docks, all of it. Use the South Channel and burn the rest. I want them cut off by midnight." He listened. "I don't care what it costs. Just do it." He hung up and looked at her. His face was pale, his eyes bruised with exhaustion. "You shouldn't be here," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. "You can't do this," Lena said, her voice shaking but firm. She stepped into the room, into the center of his power. "This is insane. You've got guns. All these men. You're going to war." "This is not a war," he said, his voice flat, turning back to a map. "This is extermination. They broke the rules. They came for you. They will not get a second chance. Because of me," she cried, her voice cracking. "You're going to kill these people. Because of me. Adrian, no. Let me go. I'll run. I'll disappear. I told you, They made it personal." He turned to her, and his voice was not the cold, flat tone of the boss. It was a low, guttural growl, vibrating with the rage he had held in the car. "They put their hands on you. Lena, they were going to take you. They thought you were my toy, my property." He stepped closer, his hands clenched. "You are not my property. You are mine. In a way I don't understand. And they touched. This is not just about you. It's about them. They must be taught. The lesson must be permanent." She saw it then. This was not a choice for him. It was a reflex. It was the only way he knew how to protect anything, to destroy the threat. He was a cornered animal, and he was about to lash out with everything he had. "What if you don't come back?" she whispered, the terror of that thought eclipsing everything else. "What if this lesson costs you? You said it yourself. They're watching you." "It might," he said, his honesty a cold slap. "Wiping out a family like the Caprellis, even a weak one. It destabilizes things. The other families won't like it. It's messy. It might cost me my position. It might cost me everything." "Then don't," she begged, grabbing his arm. His muscles were like rock. "Please, for me, don't." He looked down at her hand on his arm, his expression unreadable. "It's already in motion. It's too late." He gently, firmly removed her hand. "Go to your room. Stay with Gia. It will be over by morning." He turned his back on her. A final, cold dismissal. She saw him only in brief flashes for the rest of the day. A dark shape moving down a hall, issuing orders. The house grew quieter as the sun set, a heavy, dreadful silence. He came to her room at 10 o'clock. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, still in her clothes, her old canvas suitcase half packed on the floor. She hadn't known she was doing it. A reflex. He stopped, his eyes landing on the suitcase. A look of profound, sharp pain crossed his face. "You're still going to run." I don't know," she whispered. "What am I supposed to do, Adrian? Wait here until someone comes to tell me you're dead?" He walked to her, his movements heavy with exhaustion. He sat on the bed beside her, not touching but close. He was holding a single, folded piece of paper. "This is what you're supposed to do," he said, his voice rough. He handed her the paper. She unfolded it. It was a string of 16 numbers, an account. Below it, a 10-digit passcode. "It's a bank in Zurich," he said, his voice a low murmur. "There is enough. Enough for you to go anywhere in the world, to start over. For you, and for Gia. If you'll take her." Lena stared at it. "No, I'm not taking your blood money." "It's not," he said, his voice fierce. "It's clean. It's from my legitimate businesses, the ones my father started. It's all I have that's clean." He looked at her, his dark eyes pleading. "Please, I need you to take it. If I don't come back by sunrise, you take Gia. You take this, and you run far. You don't look back. You don't read the papers. You just live. You promise me." She was crying, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "I don't want your money, Adriana. I want you to stay, to be human, not this." He took the paper from her shaking hands and closed her fingers around it. "You can have both," he whispered. "You can have the man. But you have to let him do this, so he can be that man." He stood up, looking down at her. He was dressed to leave. Dark boots, the black Henley, a heavy, tactical-looking jacket, the mafia boss, the killer. He looked at her tear-streaked face, and the mask cracked. He was terrified, not of the fight, but of leaving her. "Lena," he whispered, his voice rough, breaking. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. His were cold. "Kiss me." Once more. He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "I want to remember softness before I do something hard." She didn't just kiss him. She pulled him toward her, her fingers lacing into his hair, and met his mouth with a fierceness that matched his own. This was not a gentle exploration. This was a desperate, claiming kiss, a promise that he had to come back. He stumbled, his hands gripping her waist, and he was half on, half off the bed. He pulled her flush against him, his mouth devouring hers. It was all the frantic passion from the office, but this time, it was laced with the metallic tang of fear, of a goodbye. She broke the kiss, pulling him down onto the bed, her hands moving from his hair to his face. "No," she whispered, her lips brushing his. "Not like that. Not like you're leaving." He shuddered, his whole body trembling against hers. He was so strong, so powerful, but in her arms, he was just a man, a terrified man who had never been held. She guided him, her movements slow, tender. She kissed his forehead, his closed, frightened eyes, the sharp line of his jaw. She was comforting him, her hands stroking his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. "I'm here," she whispered against his skin. "I'm right here. You're not alone." He made a sound, a low, broken sob, and buried his face in her neck, his arms banding around her waist, holding on as if she were the only solid thing in the world. He was trembling. The great cold Adrian Moretti was shaking in her arms. This was not passion, not in the way of fire and lust. This was connection. This was the slow, agonizing, beautiful breaking down of his walls. He was letting her in. His hands, which had ordered men to their deaths, moved with an agonizing hesitation. He touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, as if memorizing her. He touched her hair, his fingers tangling in the strands. He fumbled with the button on her blouse, the same one from the office, but this time his hands were shaking not with desire, but with a profound, reverent awe. "Lena," he breathed, his voice thick. "It's okay," she whispered, guiding his hand, pressing his palm flat against her heart. "Show me. Let me." It was slow. It was tender. It was his first time in every way that mattered. He wasn't a boss. He wasn't a killer. He was just Adrian, and he was hers. He followed her lead, his movements hesitant, his breath catching. She comforted him, whispering to him, reassuring him, until the trembling stopped. And he was just with her. It was a joining of two profoundly lonely souls, a quiet, desperate, and beautiful collision in the dark. For a few hours, the fortress, the guns, and the men outside didn't exist. There was only the small room, the sound of their breathing, and the profound, staggering relief of connection. An alarm on his watch chirped, a small, insignificant sound that shattered the world. It was 3 a.m. He tensed, his entire body going rigid. He pulled away from her, the warmth vanishing, the cold, hard lines of his face returning in the dim light. He sat up, his back to her. "Adrian," she whispered, her hand reaching for him. He flinched away from her touch. "Don't," he said, his voice flat. He stood, his movements economical, and began to dress, strapping a piece of gear to his chest. The man she had held was gone. The killer was back. He walked to the door, his face a mask of stone. He paused, his hand on the knob, but he did not turn. "Lock this door." "Do not open it for anyone but me. Do you understand?" "I understand," she said, her voice small, pulling the sheet around her. He nodded once, and then he was gone. She locked the door. She sat on the bed, her body still warm from his, and she waited. The piece of paper with the bank account numbers was still clutched in her hand. Hours passed. 4 o'clock, 5. The first gray light of dawn began to creep through the shutters. He had said by sunrise. The house was silent, a dead, waiting silence. Lena was frantic. She was pacing the small room, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She had gone to Gia, her own fear a sickness in her stomach. The child was asleep, blissfully unaware. At 7 o'clock, the sun was fully up, and he was not back. Lena was in the nursery, holding a crying, confused Gia. When it happened, a sound like a roll of thunder shook the entire house, rattling the windows in their frames. Gia screamed. Lena grabbed her, running from the nursery and into the main hall, just as a second, louder explosion detonated, this one close enough to send a vase crashing to the floor. "What is it?" Lena yelled at a guard, who was running toward the front of the house, his weapon drawn. "Car bomb! At the front gate! They're here!" Chaos. Men were shouting, running. Lena's heart stopped. "They're here! The Caprellis!" Adrian had failed. He was dead. They were coming for her. She ran back to Gia, pulling the crying child into her arms. It's okay, it's just a game," she sobbed, backing into the hall, looking for a place to hide. The front doors of the mansion burst open. Lena screamed, clutching Gia to her chest, expecting the men from the alley. But it wasn't them. It was Adrian. He was alive. He stumbled through the doorway, leaning heavily on his driver, Dante. He was covered in dirt, his black clothes ripped. His face was streaked with soot and blood from a gash on his forehead. He was limping, his left leg dragging. But he was alive. He looked up, his gaze frantic, scanning the hall, his eyes, bloody and wild, found hers. A wave of relief so profound it buckled her knees, washed over her. He was hurt. He was bleeding. He was a mess. But he was alive. He said her name. A rough, broken sound, and pushed himself off his driver, stumbling toward her. The Caprelli threat was neutralized. He had protected them all. Lena didn't even hand Gia to the nanny. She pushed the crying child into the arms of the nearest guard, her mind a singular, roaring tunnel of white noise. Him. She ran. Her stockinged feet slipped on the smooth marble of the hall, but she didn't slow. He was swaying, his face a mask of gray soot and crimson blood, his eyes locked on her. She crashed into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face burying in the torn, smoky fabric of his jacket. She was sobbing, great, tearing, animal sounds of relief that hurt her throat. He was solid, he was warm, he was here. He grunted in pain as she hit him, his arms coming up to hold her, his grip like a vice. He was shaking, not with fear, but with the last dregs of adrenaline and a profound, shuddering exhaustion. He held her tight, his nose burying in her hair, and he breathed her in. "I promised," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken rasp. "I promised I'd come back." He sagged against her, his full weight suddenly too much, his injured leg buckled. Lena cried out, trying to hold him up, but he was a dead weight. "Boss!" Dante, his own face cut and bleeding, lunged forward, grabbing Adrian before they both fell. "Get the doctor, now!" The house, which had been frozen in terror, exploded into frantic, controlled action. Men were barking orders. The car bomb at the gate was already being extinguished. The immediate threat was gone. Adrian was losing consciousness, his head slumping onto Lena's shoulder. His men, his family, lifted him. Lena never let go of his hand. He wasn't taken to a hospital. It was too public, too unsecured. The east wing of the Moretti mansion, a section Lena had never seen, contained a fully equipped private medical suite, a doctor, a man with a quiet face and older, steady hands, was there within 15 minutes, clearly on retainer for just such a night. Lena refused to leave. She sat on a small stool in the corner of the sterile white room, watching in horrified silence as they cut the smoky, blood-soaked clothes from his body. She saw the map of his life and the cost of this night written on his skin. Old, faded scars she had only felt in the dark and knew. Angry purple bruises blooming across his ribs. The gash on his forehead was deep, requiring 7 stitches. His left ankle was broken. He was not a god. He was not a monster. He was just a man, a mortal, breakable man. They cleaned him, stitched him, and set his leg in a cast. Lena was the one who, with a trembling, wet cloth, gently wiped the last of the soot from his face, revealing the pale, exhausted man beneath. She stayed. Mrs. Davies brought her a blanket and a cup of tea. She didn't drink it. The guards, Dante, even the doctor, they all tried to get her to rest. She refused. She sat in that chair for 2 days, holding his hand, the first time he woke, his eyes unfocused and cloudy with pain medication, darted around the room in a blind panic. "Where?" "I'm here," Lena said, her voice hoarse. She stood, leaning over him, squeezing his hand. "I'm right here. Adrian, you're safe. It's over." His eyes focused on her. The panic receded, replaced by a profound, bone-deep relief. He didn't say anything. He just lifted his hand, the one she wasn't holding, and touched her face, his fingers tracing her cheek. His hand was rough, his touch still hesitant, but it was a question. "Are you real?" She leaned into his palm, covering his hand with her own. "I'm real. I'm not going anywhere." He fell back asleep, his grip on her other hand never loosening. In the weeks that followed, the mansion healed. The physical repairs were swift. The broken vase was gone. The blast-scorched gates repainted, the extra guards sent away. But the real change, the profound change, was in the man recovering in the East Wing. The fortress around Adrian Moretti had been breached, not by the Caprellis, but by her. And in its collapse, the light was finally getting in. He was different. The cold, silent authority was still there. The core of him was unchanged, but it was tempered now. The ice had melted. Lena saw it first when he was finally out of the medical wing, using a dark, carved wooden cane to navigate the halls. He found Mrs. Davies in the main kitchen, where she was overseeing the inventory. Lena was there, looking for Gia. "Mrs. Davies," Adrian said. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the room. The housekeeper turned, her back rigid. "Mr. Moretti, I wanted to thank you," he said, "for keeping the household stable during the unrest. Your loyalty did not go unnoticed." The housekeeper, a woman Lena had only ever seen as a pillar of cold efficiency, actually flushed. She looked down at her hands, completely stunned. "Thank you, sir. It is my duty." "No," Adrian said. "It was more than duty. It was kind, thank you." Later, Lena found him in the nursery. He wasn't standing in the doorway, watching. He was sitting on the floor. His cast-bound legs stuck out stiffly in front of him. Gia, chattering happily, was carefully placing a bright pink cartoon character sticker on the back of his hand. Adrian looked profoundly uncomfortable, and yet he was smiling, a small, rusty, but completely genuine smile. He saw Lena in the doorway, and his smile didn't vanish. It softened. He didn't hide his vulnerability. He just let her see it. The biggest change, however, was at dinner. The long, lonely mahogany table was abandoned. He now took his meals in the smaller, warmer breakfast room, the one with the large windows overlooking the garden. And he was not alone. Lena sat with him, and so did Gia. It was awkward at first. He was a man relearning how to speak in a language he had forgotten. But Gia, with the innocent fearlessness of a child, filled the silence. "Lena said the man in the moon is eating cheese," Gia announced one evening, pointing out the window. "Is he? Is it cheddar?" Lena stifled a smile. Adrian looked at his niece, then at Lena, a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. "I think," he said, his voice serious, "it would have to be a Swiss. Because of the craters," Gia giggled. "You're silly. Uncle Adrian." And then it happened. Adrian laughed. It was not the silent smile she had seen in the nursery. It was a real, audible laugh, a short, rusty sound that burst out of him, surprising him as much as it did Lena. Her breath caught. It was the single most beautiful sound she had ever heard. He looked at her, his eyes bright, a little embarrassed, and she smiled back, her heart so full she thought it might break. That night, she found him in the library. He was standing in front of the shelves, his hand resting on his cane, looking at the empty spot where the projector was usually stored. "I was thinking," Lena said, coming up beside him. "We never finished that movie." He turned to her, a small, knowing smile on his face. I was thinking the same thing. She set it up. But this time, they didn't sit in separate chairs. They sat on the deep, comfortable leather sofa, a respectable distance between them, but still, on the same sofa. The film flickered to life, the same rain-slicked streets, the same swelling, dramatic music. Lena was hyper-aware of him beside her. The warmth radiating from his body, the clean, subtle scent of his soap. The final scene came. The man and woman, finally together, embracing in a passionate, desperate kiss that seemed to last for an eternity. Lena watched the screen, but she was feeling Adrian beside her. He was tense. She could feel him watching her. She turned her head. He was already looking at her, his face illuminated in the flickering projector light. "He's very dramatic," Adrian murmured, his eyes on her mouth. "He's just happy," Lena whispered. "He's been waiting a long time." "I know the feeling," he said. He leaned in, and the world narrowed to the space between them. He kissed her. This kiss was not the first. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss in his office, or the fearful, emotional goodbye in her bedroom. This kiss was different. It was confident. It was slow, and sure, and deep. His hand, the one not leaning on his cane, came up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. He had learned how to touch, how to be gentle. He had learned her. It was a kiss that spoke of safety, of a shared future, of a quiet, profound victory. It was not the kiss of a man who was afraid of being soft. It was the kiss of a man who had discovered that his greatest strength was not in his fists, but in his ability to be vulnerable with her. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "That," he murmured, his voice thick, "is infinitely better than the movie." Life found a new rhythm as he healed. Adrian began to focus more on his clean businesses, the ones his father had started, the ones that had paid for her freedom. But the shadows of his old life were long. One afternoon, he was in his office, his leg propped up, surrounded by financial reports. He was angry. Lena, who now entered his office without knocking, saw the frustration on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting a cup of tea on his desk. "A rat," he growled. "A Caprelli insider, someone we missed. He's sabotaging the shipping imports, diverting containers, faking insurance claims. It's a mess, but we can't find the leak. It's too clean." Lena looked at the papers, at the complex web of logistics. "They're rerouting a shipment. To be lost in transit?" she asked. Reading a line from a report, Adrian nodded. "Exactly, and claiming it's—" He stopped, seeing the look on her face. What is it?" "Lost in transit," Lena repeated, her blood running cold. "I've heard that phrase. The night I tried to run away. I overheard Dante. He said—" She closed her eyes, pulling the memory. He said, "The package will be lost in transit, along with anyone who tries to sign for it." Adrian's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been dull with frustration, were suddenly sharp as glass. "What did you say?" "It was a coded message," Lena said, the pieces clicking together. "It meant a hit, a murder, not just a lost package." Adrian grabbed the report, his eyes scanning it frantically. "He's not just stealing, Lena, he's setting a trap. This isn't a fake insurance claim. This is a setup. He's trying to frame me for the disappearance of the entire crew. He's making it look like one of my hits." He looked at her, his face a mask of stunned, dawning realization. "You remembered that? All this time?" "I remember everything about that night," she said quietly. He reached across the desk and grabbed her hand, his grip tight. "Come here." He pulled her around to his side of the desk, pointing to the map. "Okay, you're my partner. If the phrase is the code and the shipment is the bait, where is the real trap? They weren't boss and servant. They weren't protector and victim. They were partners. For 2 hours, they worked together, her memory and his knowledge of his own dark world fitting together like lock and key. They traced the logistics. They found the real scheme, the hidden bank account, the name of the mole. Adrian picked up the phone. He made one call. It was not to a killer. It was to the Port Authority and his security team. It was clean. He spoke for 5 minutes, his voice calm, precise, and final. He hung up. The final threat, the last echo of the Caprelli War, was over, neutralized. He leaned back in his chair, his body finally, truly at rest. He looked at Lena, who was standing beside him, her hand still on his desk. He smiled, a slow, full smile of pure admiration. We did it. That evening, the house was quiet. He hosted a small dinner in the breakfast room. Just Mrs. Davies, a deeply grateful Dante, Gia, and Lena. There was wine. There was real, warm laughter. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and orange, Adrian stood, picking up his cane. He held his hand out to Lena. Come with me. He led her up a flight of stairs she had never used, to a small door that opened onto the roof. The city. The one that had been a cold, rainy prison was spread out before them like a blanket of glittering jewels. The air was cool, clean. The rain had finally stopped. He walked to the edge, and she stood beside him. He left his cane leaning against the ledge. He didn't need it. He stood behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder. They stood there for a long time, just breathing, watching the city lights ignite. All my life, he whispered, his voice a low rumble against her back. I've only known fear and survival, building walls, just getting to the next day. I never knew what it was to want more. He held her tighter, his hands spreading protectively over her stomach. And then you hid under a table to protect a child. You faced me down at the gates. You were never afraid of me, just my world. He turned her in his arms, his dark eyes no longer haunted, reflecting the city lights. You made me feel human. Lena, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. You made me want more than fear and survival. You made me want this. You made me want... Lena's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. She smiled, lifting her hands to wrap them around his neck, her fingers lacing into his hair. So take more, she whispered, her voice full of a love so deep it was a part of her. She rose on her toes, her lips brushing his. I'm not going anywhere. She kissed him, slowly, deeply. A kiss of promises made and promises kept, a kiss that was not a beginning and not an end, but a continuation. He held her, his arms strong and sure, and kissed her back with all the warmth of the man he had become. The silhouette against the skyline was not a king and his servant, not a mafia boss and his maid. It was just two lonely people who had finally, against all odds, found a light in each other. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We hope you enjoyed the journey of Adrian and Lena. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more content like this. And please share your thoughts on the story in English. We read every one.